I took some finished reading because again, these are library books, and I do have to give them back, and I kind of just want to go through them as much as possible to get a good context of like all the things that I'm suffering for potential uploads. Uh, yeah, giving the opportunity of like how I'm gonna externalize because the vlog, the YouTube channel again, it's me as an externalization of stuff I like doing, and I had fun sharing, and I thought these were good projects regardless. Uh, Inevitably, it comes to lines coming across the expression of Stan Lee, a Marvel's life, iconically, and as he has passed away, given context of like expression of Marvel. Marvel Easter eggs on externalization, even in lines of a parody, with actually some movies that being really really cool. So I come in lines of like talking about well, Stanley is an interesting character because like he was famous iconically for comic books, from writers, editors, art directors, publisher, and executive. However, he himself did not actually professionally draw, and while characters he was involved in their creation that became popular and iconic for the whole world to enjoy in terms of storyline and relatable characters that people love. He did not design all the characters or draw their adventures in terms of the plot. He was their logo image, but their and his appearance are known in terms of the films. But he was actually what was it? The word I'm trying to look. He had to collaborate with other people like Jack Kirby, Steve Ditko. I think I've heard Kirby before reading in some aspects, but like for the most part, again, Stanley is a big emphasis of public exposure. Now, before anyone says anything in lines of his legacy, I would like to say that during the period of where he started going into the comic book industry, his fame was already a long-term success Marvel Comics had from 1961 to 1970, and as I said, he's famous iconically enough for other series at the same level of serialization from like James Bond. I don't know those other one. Muhammad Ali or Beatles, but there's other like quotes, but I'm not familiar with that period of time. He is a good example. Why he's adored is just like he's a good example of American success stories. Back then. He's a good example of American success stories back then. The greatest generation of child. He was a child from he had Jewish descent, yeah, and he was born in 1922. He went through that Great Depression, which I heard a bit in lines of like certain aspects of I think it's economic recession that came down, and he also served in a war from World War II before he made his business in lines of comic books, where people would like, well, the general idea is like during that period was comic downfall, people would hustle, right? A good engagement of his characterization does comes from his engaging. Yeah, he's just someone that a lot of people like enjoyed working with, and like his personality and passion, like everything else in terms of iconic representation for any field or whatever. A good passion drives them to keep pushing for their success and ability to externalize themselves. So before anyone says anything, he was actually a very respectable middle class person living a good life, and he had a wife and daughter at home in the suburbs. But being a top editorial dog in a business that wasn't yours at best, he had ups and downs as he kept going along, externalizing his success. He also may have come across some certain implication if I come in lines of saying not too much respect in lines of a legal standpoint on certain things, but like For an entertainment business, you can say that the priority is really just to entertain uh, audiences and crowds for the engagement of their enjoyment for certain things. I like to make quotes that he has been in collaboration with a lot of the industry's like famous, iconic other serializations from directors from Mel Stewart from Willy Wonka, or a high school classmate playwright from the screenwriter Patty Chayest de Marti, which I never came across actually myself. Um, so I don't know, I guess one thing that's been quoted in terms of like nerds and all that come across, like even me going to Comic Con as well. He's a good still example of someone that represents a classic American midlife crisis story. I'm bored but comfortable, glad to have survived a recent downfall of the comic book business. Uh, Lee came to a new realistic approach to superhero comics that caught up with readers. These new heroes would have been more like you if we had superpowers. And I guess this is a good big show. It's the same idea for Sherlock Holmes, you know? The origin of the story of the writer for Conan Doyle was the period that during London, what was going on is that during this time there was there was a lot of crime warfare, and a fictional character of Holmes that was written. I remember that being placed gave a lot of people some inspiration when they're reading in terms of giving. It was in a period of economic, of wide population like downturn when there was a lot of problems and certain things, and this kind of like character came to life, even if it was fictional, in terms of giving a bit people some stability in direction in their own life and their own prospects. You know, from what I recall, I do remember hearing a bit the story of like how Sherlock Holmes stories became so popular, and it was written at a time when there was stuff like that, right? So like I think Jack the Ripper was an also iconic thing that was tackled along the lines during the period with Sherlock Holmes' birth. So it's what do you call it? It comes in lines of like also take an understanding of like well, this book was published in 2019, so about 5 years ago. And what you know about the implication of generally is that I have to say on emphasis of my channel of externalization for things I like to share. Uh, he was also known as a dastardly villain, exploiting victimized artists who did all the real creative work, while he was just a lucky, slimy manipulator who was just in the right place at the right time. Well, that lasted for more than 75 years. So this begins. So apparently, in May 1963 was the year of Marvel's Age of Comics, which indeed covers the most of Marvel comics that came that month. Announced, in fact, a bold blurb. Marvel Comics Group ushers in the Marvel Age of Comics. An appealing slogan placed at a time for its popularity at back then. To be more of a clever hype, Lee and his creative collaborative were in the midst of creating that very Marvel Age, or so you may know it, the 60s. So this was more popularized even before other things that I'm into, right? 1963 was perhaps the most innovative year of Lee's life, with creative partners of Jack Kirby, I know this one, Steve Ditko, I don't know, Larry Lieber, and Don Heck and a few others. Lee was reinventing comics, coming up with characters that would change pop culture. So he was a good innovator of like some of the things that we watch in films from where they were taking birth. From Spider-Man, Doctor Strange, The Avengers, X-Men, as well as the ongoing excitement for the Fantastic Four from Lee and Kirby being unleashed in 61. Yeah, recognizing these things as well growing up watching these films and comics. Its unexpected success with Spider-Man was not something that he was expecting, especially for kids that was like getting the appeal of comics back then. Just as X-Men would make every alienated adolescent feel like there was a family of freaks he or she could fit into. He didn't know that pot smoking hipsters would look at Dicto's weird Doctor Strange stories and immediately assume that the people making these stories were likewise high or something else. Okay, I don't know about that. So Stanley thought what he was doing was running and writing much of the superhero comic books that seemed to be catching on with kids, teens, and something new with college students. I know he's also done work on anime. Actually, serialization on something that I saw on a trailer. never been contextualized. But if I had to like depict it, my Boku no Academia kind of like resembles the kind of style of expectation of the anime style that he did. So he was pushing out his work into reaching a Japanese audience in that kind of sector. If that makes sense. He put out a comic called Amazing Adult Fantasy. The slogan was magazines that respect your intelligence and indication that you that there were that there he might have actually succeeded. I couldn't be really tell. I never came across this title before. I'm more in lines of like recognizing some of his externalized popular franchise consumable media. One of the things like, I found beauty was that Lee knew that when he was making an impact in terms of conversation for his young adolescents who were having conversation in drugstores, and I just mean like super drugstores was the same iconic name for like convenience stores, right, and school cafeterias. So like a lot of his works would spark excitement along young adolescents as they were going through their expectation of high school life. So they were having fun and they were engaging in conversations. There's something for me. It was very it's very natural and nice to see, actually. Here's another thing. It comes in lines of like taking a saying, despite the boom and expectation of his he diversified, which is another implication of, if you talk about profit, it's easy to think of lines of like portfolios building for like a corporate or like retail traders. But like the exponentiation was like he also did a lot of side gigs in that industry, not necessarily just putting all his effort and time into one business for, I don't know if it was income, but for me, what really drives him is passion. Yeah, that would be it. Really, is a big thing that would have driven him to do more things was this passion to probably get stuff done. Given an externalization of my attachments on why things have been externalized, I gotta respect the fact that the on a association, it's worth making a review about this book and express it was some insecurities popping up. So a good portion of like where can people can kind of understand of like I found this was interesting basically. So they were saying like magazine management would make fun of comic book people. Generally, that's the implication. It's just like on the stereotype, right? At the end of the day, for entertainment to come down, someone needs to take the downfall, right? So like that has to be applied on a certain stereotype, on a certain aspect of it. But like when there was a point when something very serious happened, such as when President Kennedy has been killed, all sorts of everything came together to listen to radio reports. We didn't regard anything. Everyone knew that John F. Kennedy was a big iconic representation for America, and his death like impacted all people's, like everyone dropped their kind of like barriers and borders from, you could call it like tribal thinking, and came in lines to listen because it would be something quite serious. I didn't know, but like the peak for comic books also was a peak for like the Beatles. I can't be sure. Like I'm just kind of going through it, but there was a point in England, in particular, for like obviously young teenage girls, but there was a point called the Beatlemania, especially for female teen fans, and seeing Liverpool spawned musician was also starting to become popular in the United States. Sullivan booked them for a 3 consecutive early 64 episode of his New York-based Sunday just now. While experts like pop music gurus Dick Clark thought the band wasn't significant, Sullivan Extinct told him something else. So Beatles, yeah, they are an English band, and they peaked in the pop 30s, dominating from all the point to the United States, doing world travel tours and all that, and they are a point where they are a inspiration or reference for cultural externalization for Western music. It seemed to me that during the period where JFK was assassinated, people could not make that expectation. What was implied? It was implied that the Beatles also peaked in their popularity terms of conception of like appealing to a younger audience. The negative impact on that story and the alleviating effect of entertainment, uniting people and helping them feel in a way away from like the drastic reality of in a sense of humanity, comes in lines of like helping people feel reconnecting, re- giving people an opportunity to reconnect in a way, after the downfall of the assassination. I don't know too much of the politics. Just iconically, I knew there was a sniper that came in lines of play to the increased downfall of the USA president really. Uh, the only light coming from a silver screen, which was the dream world. So bigger than life, charismatic movie star Warren Williams played a powerful prosecutor in the 1932 Warner Bros. Melodrama The Mouthpiece, seen to be starring right at the young Stanley staring through him, perhaps as he summed up his case against an accused killer. The eminent attorney for the defense once made a point of this case is based upon a chain of circumstantial evidence that is true. But the evidence is a strong chain, one that cannot be broken, a chain that was wrapped itself around this murderer like an avenging python and delivered him in the hands of the law. Iconically, Stanley saw it was his bravura performance that when he grows up, he would decide to become a lawyer or an actor or both. It said that Stanley's family lived in 77 West End Avenue when he was born. Iconically, I do have to like recollect a story if I have to talk about bicycles coming online. For a very long time, I would be very scared as a kid, much of a wimp, riding my bicycle that was bought by my mom, or I just remember my mom giving it, and needing training wheels. Definitely, I was one that was needing training wheels. And I do remember being young and riding that bicycle everywhere on the road. There was a point when I kept hitting the side of the pavement, and the training wheels would be broken because they were worn because it kept hitting the side surface. And what I didn't realize as I was learning to ride my bike is that I was riding without the training wheels helping me anymore, because they would be there, but they wouldn't be in contact with the floor anymore. I don't see anybody with training wheels, these kids these days with training wheels, but for a very long time I had a lot of, I would be quite bad of like taking that step necessary to like do things. Because like I recall even my experience of like doing a roller coasters, some of my relatives would be able to like make a big deal about it in terms of like not being afraid to do it. I did have a very overprotective or a helicopter parent. Mom was my upbringing. So I like to also state that I could make this a related experience. Say, I think this is most people who had not much expectation being average people in their lives, right? Generally, he said the implication was that what was it? He described himself as an average student. It's not that he hated school. He didn't hate it being in school. It's just that he kept wishing it would be over so he could go outside and play in the real world. Yeah, that was a good expression of an implication I feel I could relate to. If he was a sport fan, he said he was a casual sports fan. He wasn't the kind that would run to the neighborhood breaking store windows if any team won, but he liked to, what is it? Living close to Yankee Stadium, Pollard started for New York. He recalled being so close to both stadiums. It was wonderful. He was a fan of both of them. I actually didn't leave. So my experience, just because we were making comparative jokes here, I used to live in Kent, Middlesex, Kent Road when I came here unexpectedly from Jeff Cott's, and I lived in a flat, and I had to share a room with my brother and my mother, and it was worn down as fuck. It's completely messy. If you go there, like that was where my dad took care of things, right? We watched TV on a box antenna box, watching X Factor and stuff like that. Couch was completely worn down. I remember visiting once, but we weren't. The state of the house is like, if you think this state of the house is bad, it wasn't that bad when we bought it. it gotten that bad because of how my dad manages things. But like it was the state of the flat back in Canton Road is much worse. 465 Canton Road. Eventually there was a push because like we needed to buy we did buy a new house. And then later on I lived in Wembley Park near A levels, where again the over focus was always gonna be on Asian stereotype upbringing, which wouldn't be getting me into sports. But I would watch films, I watch talent shows and enjoyed them, and sometimes I talk about it and hearing it from classmates and stuff like that. Still going to the same Roman Catholic school. So like in an expression of like being a sports fan, there was never strong upbringing to reinforce following sports, but I love playing sports outside, and I would always like to practice to become good at sports. So my parents never cared about this shit. Stan Lee was a strong advocate of liking reading about Shakespeare and the Bible. I think the biggest influence was Shakespeare, who is my god. I love Shakespeare. To me, he was a complete writer. To in context of the radio, I did used to listen to a lot of the radio. I would put it on the background, and if I was on even playing game, which would be my hobby when I was younger, not really going out too much except for playing ball. I would put the radio on, and it would be in the background, and I'd hear some music on. Cars also used to have a lot of emphasis on putting radio music, so like I would pick up songs from that. Like I feel pretty cool hearing like it's so old school talking about the radio and listening to your car, but like something like Kiss 99 or like radio channels in Canada that would wibble around just listening to music, and every now and then I hear something. So like Bowling for Soup, I remember hyping that up when I would hear it, and this is later on was the incorporation of was MP3s making a big deal. I could like my family was never going to follow fads for new technological advances that were cool, from the whole small MP3 to later on picking up the progression of like iPod Nano to later on where we are at a stage of phone technology being the direction of things, right? So yeah, I mean it's kind of like hitting a lot of nostalgia factors of if I'm to imply certain things of like listening music and like hearing stuff, but like a good portion of like watching music video channels were from NTVs from Canada, from when having basic cable channels, which didn't come straight away for me. I was not really rich at all, actually. Our family wasn't that rich. As I said before, we lived in a my mom was separate, well, not separated, they had problems. You're actually going, if I have to really talk about this personal stuff, it's just like the implication of like my mom was taking care of me and my little brother by ourselves, and yeah, basically my dad didn't play any factor in terms of my upbringing for the first 1/3 of my life, and I would hear them argue and like get impatient of like they don't get along. I saw my dad once, and like there's very little good memories of it. There's some, but like all of it is bad, unfortunately. And there's just like lines of like he's a violent person, and he projected that way more when I was younger. And then as a young person going through the subjectivity of narcissism, it got abusive, and it's worse when you're younger because like I would actually fight back, and the state of the flat was complete shit. The rub the sink what do you call it, the bathroom tub was completely shit. There was holes, there was shit like that. Like I can't even imagine if I were to go to 465 Kenton Road and if I look at the state of the flat, how bad it was. Neighbors would complain. I was just drinking cola. Child service supports were called in lines, and my dad would get arguments with his neighbors. When I say overemphasis of a bad personality coming from my father, I am not kidding here. Again, overdone, overworked, forced to do too much. Just like it's just a snowball is snowball on a negative aspect in terms of academic portions of like influence on things. And yet at the same time, because we were just a at mediocre school, putting effort in things that I like, sometimes I got unexpected rewards from unexpected from the performances, even though
potentially our class should have been able to do a bit better, but in A level it's a different story. I wasn't happy just coasting by and just having fun, you know. So it's just like I got through my exams. Uh, there was a lot of communication implication as well because like the stress of employment. I mean, it's not a great, beautiful picture in terms of my attachment of like how our family is. It's like I'm not gonna sugarcoat this. Well, the answer to anyone pulling. Oh, actually,
So it should be said was in this book. While doing, Lee also created with again Chad Grofkoff. Chad Grofkoff, a other working was a superhero called was Captain America. He made something called the Imp. The Imp was a humor featured of a mischievous creature who spoke solely in rhymes as his story narrator. They said anything goes with him, and that the feeling gave everyone involved was having fun messing with him. To the side that this imp was never mentioned in the main series of Captain America. I think I see, a hat trick in this, you know what I mean? Oh. This guy did this during when the world changed, and in that period of time, the Japanese force attacked Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, bringing the United States into World War II. Lee instance listed entering the army in November 9, 1942, as he did go into, I think he did went to go be a soldier. The implication of this one guy, Chad, might have snowballed the factors later on towards the events onwards. There could be a good portion that Lee felt the responsibility to enter the war was much at stake. So yeah, next is the aspects of in the actual times of when he actually did some freelance Stan Lee. It turns out that this was a period when he started writing his comics. So like they would start from like 45-page stories, which is I think a decent amount. He was doing work on some of the cool old man non-comic magazines, writing short humors, Joker, Stag, and comedy magazines. Well, he prosed fiction stories in Goodman's Mail Home Companion magazine, edited by Solomon, ever dated October 1942. One of the credited to Stanley's Stanley Martin. I think I could have gone deferment, but it was the kind of war you were a son of a bitch if you didn't get into it. It was too important not to fight. I was going to go overseas, and they taught me electrical wiring, and the idea was I'd be going ahead of the troops installing this wiring so they could communicate with each other. I felt that would be terrific. I'm doing something important. He went for military training. I assume it was the role that he played. He went to military training, but they didn't necessarily feel that they wanted to keep on the front line from what I take it the understanding to. So he did do military service, and there's probably some applied training required, especially in the implication whether they would need soldiers or not. Yeah, still, I never knew that part of Stanley, which makes him quite iconic and patriotic in that stance for his country. Given the current circumstances, they decided that they would not they would change their plan of like where they were going to position him in lines of probably of like where his background stands, and he said your plans have changed. So they never actually made him go overseas to for the expectation of what was going to be placed as obviously as a tragic tale of like of war for the politics stance of division, and that's the best way of saying it, right? Divide division in lines of stance of power during the circumstance that it was given. What it was later on implied was his background in such a type of character. Fago was someone that Stanley later on worked on. It was his comics, which his work gave probably a lot of entertainment and something to look forward for younger generations. And ambition seemed to lie in he did styles to what would be popular as big-footed animated style characters, human and animals combinations from some of the iconic characters that we would see now. Fago Forte was humor features, especially funny animal antic. This is a frenetic panel-to-panel progression, a talent that perfectly coincided with time in recent expansion into humor comics was the launching of Comedy Comics, Crazy Comics, Jericho Comics, and Terratoon, and it featured characters licensed from Paul Terry Studios. Also, the comic did say that Lee did get married during his prospect. Was never like, well, I would have never known. It's not something that I came across that he did. What is it? After basic training in his military shirt, Stanley did assign to work in training informational material in Queens. That was assigned to similar posts as Duke University in Durham, North Carolina, and Indiana, where he later dated several women. One of them said he was from a wealthy family. They were pretty odd, his old livelihood. It was stated that there was a movie industry related to comic books, but there was also a stated period when cutbacks were needed to be made, and generally it came into economic reasons.
Please have your ticket.
As comics became a popular form of consumption in municipalities, there was a implication made that they were to ban or regulate comics for the public consumption, particular crimes or horror comics. While he made sure his comics weren't as intense as their depiction of violence and gore as some of his publisher, there can still be some very extreme scenes, at least in the eyes of comic critics. Most prominent critics are psychiatrist Frederick Warfram. Warfram was active in a variety of causes, and in 1954 his research was used as evidence as negative effect of segregation in favor of school integration of landmark Browns versus the Board of Education case. So when comic books became, it's kind of like the whole debate of like consumption and exposure, and it seems to have conflicts with educational boards. So this is not always something new that educational boards have to fight off trends where youth participation and where they get their what's it called entertainment comes in lines. Yeah. Oh, it's gonna be some like different views about the rising surgence of certain behavior habits coming in lines with popular cultures, and psychiatrists always will be, seeking out the implication of trying to diminish down too much discretion on people's mental welfare when consumption of an entertainment source becomes too out of hand in terms of influencing people. Apparently, in correspondence to its views were by the name of Wertham. Wertham became convinced that many problems were faced, again, from the consumption, and he was indeed in lines of psychiatry, I believe, in Harlem Clinic. The creation of its consumption and its ban led to a secret subculture calling this a secret in terms of like being able to access and appreciate young people that parents weren't aware of. Of like violence in youth cultures being lamed into juvenile delinquency hasn't changed, in my opinion, for where adults shift the blame for their kids' behavior. For when they blame comic books to the point where they would blame video games being influencing kids to do things in lines of causing distress to their behavior. Obviously, everyone has their views on things, and it's not really my place to intervene it's not my place to intervene in people's natural environment and things without anyone's kind of like making certain choices or not, and circumstantial implication. But I thought this was really interesting when we talk about Wertham, which was a psychiatrist in lines of the comic book industry's popularity from youth culture consumption being a big factor why Marvel movies are being expressed in lines of the of a recurrent ongoing implication, right? But like psychiatrists would take the stance of saying they wanted to filter comic books, which made me feel like it's over suppressive for something that is supposed to be like consumed for fun. The censorship of comics for adults, he wished they didn't exist, and that their sales to children under age 15 were to be regulated. But at the time, I believe maybe that was a good popular medium of consumption for like young adolescents, people developing their ways and becoming themselves, or adults in their developing the ways in their their the childhood with her. The fact that child psychiatrists endorse comic books does not prove the healthy state of the comic books. It only proves unhealthy states of child psychiatry. So the Herald Time calls controversy over crimes in comic book grows. Chris covered local government attempts to regulate comics in Detroit, Indianapolis, and the 60s. In the piece, she's noted that most of the editors emphasized their personal integrity, as did Stanley Lieber, editor of 5 of the banned crime comics. And there could have been some comic books that were banned during the period in time that the things were being consumed. That kind of comes in lines of surprise to me, and I would have loved to like hear which ones would have been that case, but I don't think this is that's probably just the implication I'm trying to say. In lines of like for the sake of the entertainment bubble, especially since it's not really supposed to be gravitating towards a real story, still a fictional story. They have every right to be lost in their own bubble, despite controversy, public opinions making some implications. I guess that's just the way it is. You've got to choose a side and bubble just to prioritize your own in circumstances. No one can. That's the way it is. You got to take priorities. Priorities make it word of emphasis, and that's how you're gonna have to like stir the direction of things of your side or not. I guess it was like a very like expectation, but like he did have a family. I don't know too much details of Stanley's family, but like he had a daughter, and he would make mention of like things that are maybe out of touch from like conventional, traditional pastimes, but like spending time with her, bringing her to experience like carnivals or like theme amusement parks, and he always found time to spend with her, or like he would make time for her because like he really enjoyed having his really well, he was pretty happy to have his daughter born. So they did keep in mind that they knew that at some point this daughter would have to make their own decisions and venture the great unknown, where people make their own ways in life and environments for whatever regards they want to do. So that is a cold fact there as well. So as someone that's kind of like taking implication of attitudes and mental process of like certain things, the Goodman Focus magazine, October 1950 issues by Stan Lee, credited by Stanley Martin, entitled "The Shaming of Overzealous Sexual Habits in the Eyes of the in the communities," or like just generally just like as a function to not be implying that this is appropriate development for people's behavior in future generations is the best way of saying it. So obviously this is gonna come in lines of like a stance of like when they were addressing the issue about venereal disease, they found that the implication that legalizing expressive sexual activity tended to increase, not decrease, the incidence of venereal disease. So they take a stance, and again, in the lines of like future development, that certain things should reserve its shame and stigma to put off implications of the direction of development of communities. Yeah, that's it. In a sense, however, they do say that Stanley did lose a daughter, and this is kind of lines of a miscarriage. So they did take in incorporation that 1953 Joan Lee gave birth to another daughter, whom she and her husband named Jan. The infant died, however, she was born less than a week in prematurity. Tragedy for the lost daughter. Only lived a few days from birth, and we couldn't have more children, which is very sad, especially for something that families are looking forward to bring in their life for experience. Maybe not talking to such a third person derogatory matter or what so. I've always been so like they share that kind of like bliss because in lines of saying that having a daughter already existing in his family the fact that they would lost a potential new family member made it a very tragic event that they were terribly feeling remorseful. I find this quite interesting. So I think it was in the early 1953s with newsstands and the development of like superhero comics going into the TV series, and it was a huge hit. People loved it. Later on, other superheroes of several titles, obviously as things developed, established and would make superstar comic artists in the 1960s. So timely, or someone drew Captain America stories for the revival. Carl Burgos created the Human Torch, and newcomer Dick Ayers' work was the character. So it's a lot of these characters that's become popular in that kind of franchise do come from sometimes collaboration of like a few people making a hero backstory and something that people can like really get attached to and find enjoyment in. Right, the revival would last less than a year, except in the case of Submariners, who held it another year into 1955, with this prospect of TV series adaptation of the character keeping the Princeton version alive. TV series would never happen, and some writings of some superhero stories that year. Lee mostly confined his writing to humors and westerns, as well as some mystery, horror, and war stories. So I do feel like he was in lines of a good portion of the writing for the creations. So your argument about families that choose to have more, I can't help but say, overprotective natures of certain things, the implication of when they thought media entertainment consumption, even if it's depicted not to be real, would have a negative correlation towards whatever it is their preference, they would imply them just don't read them. No one's shoving these content inside of you. If you don't like them, they exist, but you do not need to force yourself to consume it. Some references do come in lines of interest to me. The Menace #7 include another anti comic story, The Witch of the Woods by Lee and John Sinnott, and involves a father who takes away his son's comic books, reads the kids fairy tales instead. The kid demands, "Come on, Dad, tell me what's next. What's next?" The anticipation of children's upbringing from storytelling is probably something that's maybe lost in value these days. I can't be sure. They have a very strong sentimental attachment to most people, I think. The implication of during that period of time, their attempts to make Bible comics, and the editor went to Yale Divinity School for guidance, but generally the implication of the popularity of those comics usually had tanked. I assume meaning they didn't go that far. So next I want to talk about is basically Stan Lee in the 1957 was in lines of trying to find a way outside of comic books and find other ways of comic related income, at least later on in the years. But the business itself was getting suddenly cancelled and such. Even without those menace in his position as, it could be argued that Lee started to look to expand and not change the horizon of his publications. It is not to say that Stan Lee didn't come across some form of friction was working with his other editors, including Goodman and Bruce J. Friedman. Generally, what would happen is that Goodman felt that he couldn't fight with us, so he made an evident effort to humiliate him, so he would quit. And the implication was that he was hoping Stan Lee would take the hint and go. Apparently, in the corresponding creations of what are popular superheroes such as Ant-Man, Iron Man, and the Human Torch and Thor, it was said that it was unclear if Stan Lee created these heroes by himself or if it was a story, a product of both Lee and Jack Kirby, from a few conference meetings. And so one fact was undisputable. Starting in 1958, Jack Kirby did many stories in a variety of genres, Wiz and with Stan Lee. So yeah. It was established that Stan Lee also did a side hustle aside from the comic book genre to strip Uh, what was it now? Strip pitches for newspapers, small comics that are placed into them for entertainment, was for a small snippet of jokes and so. What surprised me in this article, in this book, was to talk about in times of scarcity, national editors would exercise their power through demanding condescending behavior towards freelance staff not being nice at all. So the idea was rumors of pay-to-play editorial kickbacks, where sometimes editors would reject such so-called toilet paper work a writer would give him, only to then pass the rejected idea of one of their own in order the second writer to use the same plot. So they own the possession of the idea, or so to speak, in the implication of freelancer workers trying to enter the market for when comic books were popularized. I took it in mind. There was also saying that was people who were employed with Stan Lee. Implication was that anybody that would interact with him in terms of like work from artists to freelancer writers, he had a thing that he would say, Lee made a bunch of caring people to work with this book. He was about to get them to care, so he made them feel welcome in his approach rather than treat them as just like workforce. So so the people who come to work for the company come to feel that their environment was feeling like home or such. So it was actually around from the creation from 1956 to 1959, when 1956 editor Schwartz helped heavily revamp the version of Flash, Green Lantern, the Atom, and Hawkman. 1959 was Flash and Green Lantern, along with Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman, and all those comics those comics had never stopped being produced, as well as 1955 debuting Manhunter from Mars, were teamed up as the Justice League of America. The team would go on to have great sales success. 1957 saw the beginning of the space race. It was the USSR Sputnik satellite shockingly beating the USA launch of Explorer 1 the following year. Nuclear fears was the air as the arms race with the Soviet Union progressed. It also has the beginning of recession, which exerted Goodman's distribution issues. The Eisenhower era of optimism was shot through with fear and a great rise. Everyone was on might end and finally irrevocably at the moment. So the next part was, as it turns out, the Fantastic Four was a very popular franchise that Stan Lee created with Jack Kirby, and even in lines of their villain, the modern timeless Atlas superhero Doctor Doom. Doctor Doom was a passive-aggressive attempt to just do one and be done with this Win Martin, so that they could get on with the work they had already committed to getting done. I don't really get why I kind of like fleshed out from there. I just kind of thought the relevance of bringing this in, but surprisingly, coming back to the Fantastic Four, Thomas heaped praise of the Thing, calling him a frightening champion of justice. In continuing, something is needed in a period of all too handsome Superman to remind us the goodness of heart of an attractive physical appearance are not necessarily synonymous. Putting in lines that the Thing, despite being its massive grotesque form, it wasn't a real representation of its character, as he, in the inside, had a very warm heart in comparison. And Thomas thought that was a beautiful concept in creating the Thing. So what came through for both Lee and Kirby's instinct to go with their gut, to care less about the logic and consistency of stories that they made, and more about the emotional impact of what they were writing and drawing. The dominant imperative would betray through his art the characterization of raw feelings and the steamroll intensity of the narrative. Lee would focus on how his characters said and what they said, how poignantly they expressed their thoughts, feelings, and personalities, as well as important
for the story, which was important for the story themselves, and what would make the stories work. Academics would call it dialect and ongoing arm wrestling between dominance between the two creators, as both expressed their comics in different ways. But that's what made the product so much better, because both would compete in terms of the emotional impact in their own forms to be able to reach their audience. The release of the Fantastic Four session, number 1 session, went on sale, and depending on regions, or around August the 8th, 1961. I think what I wanted to talk about was the overlap of the Cold War and the space race happening around that period of time, during the time of which the Russians sent Yuri Gagarin to be the first man shot in space on April the 17th. And that's it, yeah. So later on, it came to notice that after the Fantastic Four popularity, the eponymous comic dated back in May 1962, they made the recent creation called The Incredible Hulk, which would be put on sale around February. The Incredible Hulk replaced the teenage romance in the limited Goodman's lineup. The series, the saga, and timid scientist Bruce Banner would be able to transform through gamma radiation into a raging engine of destruction, which lasted for a 6 bi-monthly issue, with treatment of the character changing from issue to issue. Later on, the Hulk would catch on in terms of popularity of the next few years.
So I want to talk about Stan Lee's approach when he created Spider-Man. So the conceptualization of Spider-Man, apparently according to Stan, was the idea that he wanted to make teenagers in comics become the actual superhero, and tired of the troop of millionaires or superheroes being adults. He wanted to start someone that was more relatable in terms of age range from what would be seen as a sidekick at the start. This led to the Amazing Spider-Man, and most people would say the disparity from having a poor hero with powers is better than all the other ones that they were used to seeing being massively rich. Everything about the character was innovative and fresh for the concept. The superhero Spider-Man had not only did he juggle with the ability of having new powers, but he came from a family that was not rich, who would want to dot him even though they didn't have too much cash themselves. A lot of these things linked in touch points maybe with among teenagers, and what else? It also comes in lines of talking about that his personality quirks really stood out. Generally, Spider-Man was quite funny, cheeky, funny, and he juggled a lot of stuff similar to what you see in Ken Clark, right? A romantic life with social life, along with a life where he has superpowers, just not as overpowering as you can see for Superman. His tragedies as well in life, where he had lost his relative, was also a turning point. So the character was quite fun to create for another standpoint. One of the beauties of this character was that they watched him, and so many people saw it. He acted in a manner that most people would have wished that they would do the same as a hero. And one of the things that's most impressive is also the fact that though he was far from perfect, he never stopped trying, which he complained and fretted, but always end up in the right thing in life. His creators have discovered a unique combination that would become the template of a whole new style of superhero. He was the best you, but without losing your problems or deficiencies. Interesting enough, Stan Lee's co-workers, Dicto, I believe, during this period of time from the 1960s to around the 1960s, I believe there was still a epidemic of tuberculosis, and a lot of sentiment attached to each person's life are said to are projected onto the artwork and the storyline. So there was a lot of emotional connections to their comics for certain creations that they made.
So one of the characterizations that I want to kind of express when it comes to lines to Spider-Man was he was a story of like a person who is still shattered suddenly and traumatized, and often had to deal with simultaneous multiple repercussions from also related real life events. Peter had to deal with his uncle's death, which he blames himself as the same as a child who is a child of an unemployed father who may blame himself at that age for family issues and woes, the financial needs of his elderly aunt, as well as her ongoing medical crisis. Echoing arguably Lee's mother's battle was the influence of cancer that ultimately took her life. Peter Parker's life is just trauma after trauma after trauma, which is why Stans takes liberty of saying that his life is like a journey that feels that he really puts a test in his character on hero qualities, right? So this is why a lot of people may feel attached. He just acts in a manner that most people would say that he is quite cool, I guess, to say it, because I think most people would go left at some point after feeling so much devastation happening, havoc in their own life. The book does talk in terms of conceptualization when it comes to describing what Spider-Man meant, and Spider-Man plays in the idea of what we talked about before, the duality in nature. Then what was so the duality as in its nature. Peter Parker was a character of contradiction, proud and ashamed, powerful and weak, focused yet scattered. And this comes was the idea of juggling a different identity from how he needs to be in real life. So this is why he has that duality in nature. On the one hand, he's Peter Parker. On the other hand, he's Spider-Man. And he makes the connection between these two, his ultimate ego, to be quite separate from how he projects himself otherwise. A good attachment to readers may comes in line of his relatability of the comic book hero, because like he is not, he doesn't live one form of persona in reality, but he lives the persona of someone that doesn't have powers, or he tries to pretend that he doesn't, which makes his life all the more difficult when he needs to address things, but all the more attached do you feel the readers are into, because the idea is behavior Spider-Man could be within yourself as well. There seemed to be a default when they created comic book characters in lines of making things easy. Now the answer was that most of them generate their powers through lines of radioactivity. It was just simple. The whole idea was radioactivity was causing mutations, which would give people abnormal characteristics, obviously. To the extent of fiction, obviously, radiation is within its limits of like saying whether a positive mutation comes in a line, that is not something that comes instantly for gratification, for possibilities. So like it's obviously just a story, The aspect of those who later on these characters that later on become heroes, which led to a trauma, seem to be derived on one thing that seems to be in common from Spider-Man to Doctor Strange. Their trauma have led them to the outcomes of selfish behavior on their own parts. So they can kind of see the powers as being a repercussion of their personality externalized in an incorrect way, whereas Spider-Man's happens after he's developed that confidence having the power, and on the other hand, Doctor Strange developing that exhibiting selfish behavior because of his job status or role that he had before he became Doctor Strange. It is in the 1963 that the Shield made an introduction was Sergeant Fury placed on board, and his Howling Commandos from the first issue placed into comics, and being the leader of the covert spy group. 1963 also being the period when the first X-Men and the Xavier introduction of his comic series follows up,
onwards into serialization. And finally, it was also during this year that what you call the Avengers was created in collaboration of existing heroes that they've made already previously on their comic book interpretation. So 1963 was an innovation of a lot of different characters and group organization for superheroes to come in line. According to timelines, Captain America would be revived in Avengers number 4 and soon get its own feature from the Tale of Suspense from March 1964. The Submariner would co-star in Tales to Astonish during an issue in the number 70, dated back to 1965. Generally, this period of time was be a great peak for what is mainstreams for current comic book heroes played inside the universe. What is described to make the comparison between DC heroes and Marvel heroes was generally the idea that what was said was that they were basically chiseled jawed, shiny tooth good guys that were guys before they become hero or good guys after they become hero. A big disparity comes in lines that Marvel heroes had flaws. More flaws in comparison in terms of their characterizations and personality in comparison to DC heroes. Were portrayed in a manner that's kind of like in lines of perfection. I like this line because it kind of comes in lines of saying, so the idea of heroes generally comes in lines of saying, they establish that they have a strong hold and ground towards morality as a practice in culture. To not do the right thing would make you a villain, as many Marvel villains had origins not unlike those of its heroes, or simply placed out that doing the right thing, not simply because it's the right thing, as most Hebrew would do, but because the thought of living with yourself after not doing the right thing is unbearable. Not only were Marvel heroes riddled with flaws of a Shakespearean level, but so, as mentioned, were its villains. What made the heroes heroes was their transcending their flaws and traumatic passes. They could do it, so could you. Even if some villains like Hawkeye and Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver could transcend their past and become heroes, then maybe there was hope for you no matter how many times you screwed up. Handcore villains like Doctor Doom, Dr. Octopus, and the Mole Man were felt individually who used their power to get even with the world, to get rich, to abuse others. The hero eventually, and with great struggle, rose above such base response to life adversity. That's what made them heroes. Marvel villains, of course, were not without a certain tragic nobility too, which made them appealing and sympathetic, despite their horrific action. This more sophisticated approach to bad guys was another leap forward for their comics. So what Marvel did in difference to DC Comics in accordance to this was that the Marvels made their characters and stories develop over time. They changed and grew from issue to issue, year to year, in comparison to what DC would do, where Superman would be able to foil and take control of a bank heist so much so during its story. Now, this is taken with a grain of salt, but generally, the impression is the Marvel heroes had more flaws to be expected and more needs to overcome obstacles in comparison to the expectation of most DC comics. As a general rule, I don't agree that the DC heroes don't necessarily have progression, but they don't get presented in a manner that's more powerful than expected in the average person. And I wanted to highlight that when Marvel incorporates storytelling, everything evolves around them. It's not just the character itself on a single focus. They make the scenery and the environment feel alive. Just like as you are progressing, other people are progressing or changing, and the dynamic structure of where you go to doesn't stay the same after revisiting it. So that's what they like to highlight in those things. Developing comics was a good direction by making a relationship to attach the artists or or the editorial with the customers or the readers was a good establishment, as you said, for getting people to drive to buy more comics. The idea was as well that the editorial pages were
fans would send gifts or send requests for send that to the original artist, was a point of ways of how they could develop a form of relationship attachment, because they like the comics and then they want to be attached to the person, make a connection with the person who created it because they had a good time with it.
The idea of touch points, or like touch points, was artists and editors with their readers, essentially stuff like competition set on interaction, where they talked about prizes being offered, such as a picture of the men with two heads autographed by the original artist, Bill Everett. Historian Michael Vassallo believes the picture must have some kind of print. I don't really know that last sentence I said, but like the impression of when I read this was like it was relatable in terms of trying to interact with audience and bringing incentives to participation in forming a relationship between reader and creator. The popularity of Stan Lee was later on transferred to other communities which didn't get much attention. And this did bring in some other people who were following Stan Lee's popularity or clout, so to speak, into different places. He was invited to places such as the Science Club, and it drew in as nearly as many people as you expect the film club's attendance would be in. So generally, he was spreading his influence in other communities that may be less popular, but are a necessity for certain career paths or journeys. From my perspective of things, I see that it is said that Stan Lee later on took the inspiration of traveling to get more idea and progress to understanding more about creativity that he could place. So the more he traveled, the more he started speaking to, as he started socializing, the more he realized he could help Marvel sell comics and provide them with an income stream as a speaker that could replace and exceed any writing work that he has relinquished. I took surprise to reading that apparently during Stan Lee's peak of popularity and transition to a celebrity title, he also met the Beatles, and believe it or not, Asher told Lee and his pals the Beatles were also Marvel fans. In the August of 1966 Bullpen Bulletin, Stan told of Asher's visit and the top Marvel love continued. The whole idea was like, he is one of us. He also lives and enjoys entertainment values that are similar to normal people who do go through life doing their best to find a stable job and career to form the life that they want and hope to get. So the TV series for the Batman, interestingly, was Adam West, being launched in high ratings in January 1966, one of the popular superheroes that Broadway musical featuring DC's flagship character. So the comics came first. Then the Adam West TV series came, which had more comic value for Batman series. The iconic slogan of "It's a bird, it's a plane, it's Superman," starring Bob Holliday as Superman, as well as Linda Lavey as Jack Cassidy, father future of the teen idol David Cassidy, debuted at Broadway the same year. So I think this was in line of the TV serialization of these popular characters, comic book characters. The comics came first, generally. Apparently, it's issue number 52, where they first introduced the first black superhero who was in the Marvel series, the Black Panther. Interested in a 4-part story, generally referred as Doomsdays. Issue number 5760, where Dr. Doom steals the Silver Surfer's cosmic power and uses it in an attempt to kill the Four and conquer the air. Without saying, Stan Lee did come across near the point of the 1960s to later on some lawsuit implication, and this threatened Stan Lee's work that would deform everything he's worked for a good 5 years. Doing allegation may come in correspondence to credit or ownership of certain of the intellectual property and its copyright, and leading to copyright infringement issues or not. Over time, I believe Stan Lee wanted to express himself through his creative work, as he did share ownership for
he didn't share ownership for the Marvel series. This line, this quote passage from what was written in the book, seems to be pretty good as well. It says here that let's lay it right on the line: bigotry, racism, or other form of deadly social ills plaguing the world today. Sooner or later, if man is ever to be worthy of its destiny, we must fill our heart with tolerance and perseverance. For then and only then we are truly worthy of the concept of man created in the image of God. We are all his children. A bit of like a kind of like preaching proverb placed here.
One of the things that Stanley said was a very powerful form of media representation was the power of the radio. He used to listen to a lot of different types of channels in radio, and I guess the implication was that the radio channels, when he's listening, help fired up the thought process of imagination. There's some things you didn't know, you only listened to their voice, and that gave people an unexpected let their imagination of the perspective of the person that's listening to it help see if they could get drawn in or not, you know. One example of a radio channel that was popular by the time in the period that he was living in, which was New York, was the WAI radio channel from New York, and this would be a good center point nexus for what was being broadcast in the media as counterculture. Stanley took a great gravity for the sake of entertainment that Americans usually root for the underdog story for most certain circumstances. Yeah, I mean, this is why he felt the power. This is why he wanted to keep the bending of the image to Marvel to come in lines of the underdog story, as if they started seeing them as leaders, they know that the mass majority of the audience would sympathize with another theme. The quote was this: "I don't want to lose our image of being underdogs, which we've had for years. The little outfit that can come along or challenging to the big fellows. The American public, being the way it is, wants to be known to be leaders. They're liable to sympathize with another outfit. I like to think of us as little, homey, fine outfits. You know, we're not quite that big and successful. We're not the fat catfish yet. Jack feels differently, though, I think." The activity of engaging the audience with the plot was making the characters have a certain amount of realism. The characters could talk and react like real people, not just the summary plot synopsis of like bad guy comes in, good guy gets introduced, and good guy tries to kill the bad guy. The thing is, it felt alive. It really added to the submersion of the story. So there's one thing that took in lines of coming into opinion, but the current comic book heroes embolize a different sort of kind of like their antithesis of democracy. They just this is not true. I think there is some superhero comics that come in lines of making representation of like defeating and dealing with the problems without violence and power, but it would come lines of stuff like I haven't finished watching Daredevil, but maybe that's an implication where they use the law or democratic heroes, and this could be a shift of the direction where Marvel could start publishing, seeing if there was a hero that could use his mental capacity to be able to deal with problems through the law. Not too sure how fun it would be to watch it though, as you say. So the next part I want to talk about is they made mention of someone called the Silver, of the creations that Stan Lee made in 1970. He realized that more adults were also still reading books and at college level, which is tremendously gratifying to him, since they would have been exposed to a lot of literature. He started having a bit more a stance on political and moral implications on voicing out his opinions on certain things. In certain comics, he also opened up about trying to moralize them as much as possible. I'm not overdoing it and turning people off, but I'm actually on half a preacher's at heart. So this came in line to the characters such as the Silver Surfer. It goes without saying that Stan Lee later on got more
what was the word I'm looking for? Acknowledgement for his work, as it's generally what it did. It was that it was giving him opportunities to meet other workers in lines of like higher educational settings, and he felt flattered by it, that people of prestige educational backgrounds were getting exposed and enjoying his comics.
Along with the implication of attention for like this success that Stanley get received, Jack Kirby, also known as the King, or implied if they gave the sentence King, was probably something that he wasn't too sure about. But Jack Kirby was a big portion of the connection in relation to the creation of Stanley's brand. Generally, I would say. So Kirby might have been thought to be referred as King Kirby was corny, but as a recognized brand, but it couldn't be beat. Months and months of Lee telling Marvel readers how great Kirby was, and one of the key figures of its creation of Marvel magic, meant that Kirby was in the mind of Lee a part of Marvel that cannot be replaced. Marvel without Kirby was unthinkable for the co-creation of this product. Just as Marvel without Dicto wouldn't have been a case. From Dicto being co-creator of Doctor Strange, but Fantastic Four was first and had foremost to set the tone for everything, being the first exemplary success for Stan Lee's comic brand. So Kirby was responsible for the layout of new and returning artists, and Kirby, who was also drawing many of these covers for comic books. Thanks to Lee, Kirby was considered as irreplaceable as irreplaceable Stan Lee. Keep in mind, it's Western comics that started the franchise of superhero films in the West, And similarly to we would talk about like manga being the franchise starting point for a lot of anime being popularized in the East, and manga also having its origin from light novel books. Popularized light novels get publicized into manga, translating to manga towards anime. There's just a different culture of consuming entertainment for storylines. So if you like the Batman series, there's no reason why you wouldn't like anime as well, because that's the equivalent, but in Japan. So similarly to likely, he wanted to make use of Marvel's success to widen his creative and financial horizon. Kirby was negotiating a new contract with Cadence, but he was certainly well aware of being closer to the wellspring of film and TV production could work to his advantage one way or another. So he wanted to validate the work that they did together to push out his own success independently away from Stan Lee's propagation of fame, if that makes sense. And this is something I can really emotionally express in a positive manner, right? Because he was actually there for those. Well, he was the one involved for the circumstances for this to push out. So I'm not talking about the next part. In 1971, Lee and Rennes was in the first of the projects, because I never knew about this. They were coming in lines of making expected movie, and they were co-creating in lines of making it as a movie, and Roy Thomas was writing the script of The Monster Making for Rennes. The story deals with burnout producers of grade B horror films, but had a great success with genre work, but now yearns for a more meaningful film about the danger of pollution. The script itself weaves a fine line between self-parody and seriousness, and it's impossible to tell how it would be done, with some rewrites, and cast was in both the humorous and the serious aspects of the script. It was written for Filmways Incorporation Lead, and he was paid $25,000, not bad, but it was never produced. So the partnership for Rennes he came to New York. He wanted to do Spider-Man movies at the time, but just wasn't in a position to give him a Spider-Man movie, and he didn't have that much power. But got to be very close friends, and he thought, let's do another movie, one that we could do together. And I came up with the idea of The Monster Maker. I wrote that, and I had never written a screenplay, and I overwrote it. Too much dialogue, he said, unfortunately. We brought it to someone, Martin Ressenhoff, who was the head of Filmways, and he loved it. He wanted to produce it. He said, you gotta cut the dialogues. You gotta make it half the size, so it's too much, basically. And it eventually gave in. But, it was interesting to hear that he had some collaboration of mixing horror genres to the production of where his film was going to push up later on. So in capitalization, I thought this is a very honest quote implying that the starting out from on the lead panel, perhaps smarting was the loss of Kirby and the conflict of code. Losing something of truth bombs. The most devastating was this. I would say that the comic book market is the worst market that there is on the face of the earth for creative talent, and the reasons are numberless and legion. Even if you reach the pinnacle of success in comics, you'll be less successful, less secure than if you're your average practitioner in the art of television, radio, movies for entertainment. The creator owns nothing of his creation, the publisher owns it. And instead, it's simple along the lines I think working for a publisher is so Goldwater made his implication trying to defend ownership rights for publishers, saying, I think it's a wonderful apprenticeship. I think working with a publisher is a wonderful apprenticeship. Why deny a young fellow the opportunity and learning from pros and then going on from when there is to something else? Lee replied in this manner, but isn't it pathetic to be in a business where the most you can say for the creative person in the business is that he's serving an apprenticeship to enter a better field? Why not go into the other field instead directly? Implying the implication of for new generation lines of talking about success, where they should actually put their efforts and emotional attachments towards. Marvel also introduced later on in the 1970s a solo black superhero inside their branding called Luke Cage. Cage, a superhero in that lines. And also there was a character that was templated in terms of using Stan Lee as a template called the Funky Flashman. Looking at it back and seeing the picture of what these kind of different heroes. The brand was making inclusion and playing in their influencers in terms of creating things, creating forward development for the comics. The introduction of the new character, without giving too much away about their introduction, led on to the development of the story. It was up for the public to kind of get a sense what new characters were introduced, whether they were heroes or villains based on the actions they would take, or whatever the public would have preferred. So that was a stance of also a good way, I feel, are to introduce characters and give it a bit of spice in terms of engagement. So I like it. At some point, it was stated that comic books were no longer selling anymore. It's the approach that Marvel's characters new and starting no longer had effect. The comics are now selling on other factors, but novelty of introduction of new characters was no longer one of them. Which is why Lee was eager to try new genres and formats to help with engagement. The notion of one of the beloved storylines in The Amazing Spider-Man coming lines of killing off a beloved supporting character for character development. It showed impact and was innovated by Jerry Conway, the series writer from Jerry Conway. The decision was arrived that it would be Peter Parker's girlfriend Gwen Stacy that would be murdered, which happened under issue of 121, released in March 1973. Fan reactions to her demise, especially at Voice of Lee's campus appearance, was largely negative. It didn't help that the way the death was staged, it seemed as if it might have been Spider-Man who inevitably killed her when trying to save her from the Green Goblin. Lee would tell audience and perhaps truly believed the decision was made without his input while he was away on a business trips. Everyone else involved has denied this was possible, and even if he were for a few days, he was enough on top things that he would have known about and approving the crucial moment of the character's life. There seemed to be a lot of controversial debate when they were trying to do this scene for better growth of the character. But for me, it's just a fiction story. It just gives me a lot more impact in saying that this a lot of tragedy to the character and engagement. The word is, it provided a lot of engagement with the comic book series as they were trying to keep in their popularities, right? Interesting enough, the co-creators of certain superhero franchise was Hollywood picking up a good portion of wanting to use their popularities for superheroes for the production. Came in contrast with some of the co-creators. For example, for Superman, Jerry Siegel was writing a lengthy press release that started this way. The co-originator of Superman put a curse on the Superman movie. It hoped that it would super bomb because loyal Superman fans would stay away from it. Drove
whole world becoming aware of the stench that surrounds Superman will avoid the movie like a plague. Why is he doing such a thing? Because cartoonist Joe Shuster and I, who co-originated Superman together, will not get 1 cent from the Superman super movie deal. Joe is partially blind. My health is not good. We are both 61 years old. Most of our lives during Superman's grace has been spent in the wants. So they were not getting any credit or money funding for corresponding of their creation, even though Solid wanted to commercialize their intellectual property. This is not to say that all co-creations felt the same way about their works being drawn out and made money from the business for their commercialization. Popular artists from Neil Asdom and former Batman artist Jerry Robinson both are successful commercialized artists, neither of whom dependent on comic books to make a living. So in general, the implication is like where they put the basis of how they make their money and survive. So in 1976, there was a new set of law called the Copyright Act, which was seen through Congress. The act would be signed by the President Gerald Ford on October 19th and would potentially open the floodgate for comic book creators and other fields as well to claim ownership of freelance work that they've done for media corporation. The act would go into effect in 1978, but generally this was a good way for artists to not feel taken advantage of in terms of their intellectual property when they were working freelance work. Apparently, I think what I understood was Star Wars also started as a comic, or before the movie serialization. Hold on. The approach Roy Thomas, by then a freelance writer and editor from Marvel, who at first, given the current project, said there was nothing he could do. But upon being shown still and scripts for the production of products, Thomas realized that Star Wars wasn't a hard science fiction, but more of a space opera. Started to depend more on characterization, humor, and emotion than real science. In other words, it was very similar to Marvel Comics. Thomas' enthusiasm and the fact that Lucas was giving him the comic rights to Marvel for free, no upfront licensing fee was required, convinced Lee and Galton to greenlight the comic adaptation, which debuted several months before the Star Wars movie opened. The Star Wars comic by Roy Thomas and Howard Chaykin, which took 6 issues to adapt the movie, and then continue an ongoing series with news Lucas-approved stories, was a massive hit. It also credited in saving Marvel, if not from extinction, and from several cutbacks. It success led Marvel to take on many more licensed property, Shogun Warriors, Micronauts, and so on and so on. I guess it generally is trying to say that they had comic adaptations of the film before the film was released, if I understand correctly. With the Copyright Act of 1976, when it came into effect, Marvel decided later on that they assigned their contractors for freelancers to guarantee that all work they did for Marvel was work for hire and that it would be owned forever by the company, just to make the connection solidify. I've come to take adherence to this quote that was placed in this book. Lee announced in the soapbox of a student of a recent speech he gave to the good old James Madison's. It reminded me of a promise I'd forgotten in a decade. He said it is a promise in the late 60s to do a column entitled, "What is Bigot?" The lead then present the definition of what a bigot is. When I said bigotry is one of the many stains upon the human escutcheon, which must be eradicated before we can truthfully call ourselves civilized. It's most easily recognized in the form of cruel and mindless generalization, and the turkeys that talk that way are bigots, plain and simple. The whole progress was Marvel and the co-creators with Stan Lee, including Jack Kirby. They do admit that there was always a lot of back and forth in terms of the relationship about their agreements, ownerships, and how to carry popular character franchise forward and what so. Yeah, I mean, Lee's profession of love was not only not rejected by Kirby, it was, however, hesitantly reciprocated. And again, the relationship showed itself to be complex indeed. So no matter how much Lee tried to immerse himself in Hollywood and leave the past behind, the past would have a different idea of how it should be treated. The question was begged to be answered was, could Lee make use of the past and create a positive future, or the past rise as consumed him? So in 1994, apparently Jack Kirby passed away, and Stan Lee didn't stay at the back, try to keep a low profile while he attended the funeral.
saying that he didn't want the relationship to be explored any further during the time that he was showing his respect and mourning for his friend's passing and co-creator of the Marvel series. Another one of Stan Lee's friends who co-created Batman, Bob Kane, passed away, and he was recollecting his experience with him as they used to talk about the playful rivalry they have with the popularity of Batman versus Spider-Man. According to this interview with Jonathan Ross in Ross 2007 In Search of Steve Ditko documentary, Lee called Ditko after the time letter appeals and described the conversation he had with Ross. He said, "Having an idea is nothing, and because until it becomes a physical thing, it's just an idea." It said it took him to draw. It said, and he said it took him to draw the script and give it to life, so to speak, to make something tangible. So it was like in 2009 that the stated goal to make Marvel the next Disney, the Walt Disney Company purchased Marvel Entertainment Industries for about $4 billion. The same year, Disney also purchased 10% of POW. And also in 2009, the estate Jack Kirby, through the lawyer Mark Toberson, filed a lawsuit against Disney and other corporate entities associated with Marvel Industries for ownership of the characters Kirby was involved crediting for Marvel. Many industry figures were subpoenaed to testify in case, including Lee. So it said here that the community, his wife was a good portion of moral support during his time when he was going through a lot of hardship, and he would usually be communicating with a lot with his wife Joan, and also to the point of his death. And later on, it talks about Lee's deaths are listed around lines of heart failure and respiratory failure as the cause of death. It seemed he suffered from aspiration pneumonia, which was caused by inhalation of food, stomach acid, and saliva. Lee's remnants were cremated. He announced that Stan was adamant as he did not want a large public funeral, and as such, his family has conducted a private loop ceremony in accordance with his final wishes. Lee's longtime executive assistant Michael Kelly pointed out, even though his passing was sad, especially the year or two leading up to it, there wasn't any unfinished business, not with me, and not with the most people around him. His last couple of months, he was pretty much at peace. I could see it when he was sitting there looking out, and he would talk about being pretty much content, relaxed. So he didn't suffer when he passed away. In relation to support as well, because his wife was a good portion of it. When she passed away before him, he still kept up with some a public socializing gathering, but it still was a tragedy, considering how much of a support she had played in a part of his life. In relation to success stories, January the 21st, 2009, it was announced that Black Panther movie had been nominated for 7 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, the first superhero film ever to ever been nominated, and it didn't take home Best Picture. It did win 3 other awards. January 27th, the film won the Screen Actor Guild Top Prize and the Best Assembly of Motion Picture Awards. Stan Lee and Jack Kirby created Black Panther in 1966 for Fantastic Four number 52. Not long after they came up was Galactus, the Silver Surfer, the Inhumans, and so much of the became foundation of the Marvel Universe. It was also their first black superhero. Was just one of the dozen now famous characters that was invented back then. Quotes in this book include Mark Ruffalo and Mark Hamill, giving tribute to Stan Lee from things, from the creator for Game of Thrones, George R.R. Martin. He got a lot of acknowledgement, including Chris Evans as well from Captain America. it's pretty legendary, yeah. And family members from Gillian Kirby to Jack Kirby's granddaughter. Stan Lee, he embodied the company and really made his readers, me, feel special. Made people feel like
that the creators gave you the feeling that you were right there in that Marvel bullpen that didn't actually exist.
Hey everyone, thank you for putting the effort to watch the effort I placed on making something of an entertaining video. I hope you enjoyed it. As I said before, it's not forced, but like I really would appreciate any contribution and support you give to this channel, as it gives me more motivation and more incentive to enjoy more video creating and content creation. If you find that the content's drifts away at any point, you can always unsubscribe. It's no big deal. Again, it doesn't mean much. It doesn't take much from you, but it means a whole bunch of me. And it would feel great if you would just reward my efforts of trying to be positive and contributionary. Thank you so much. Bye.